What's up, you cuboid whippers? Welcome to another episode of 3 PTs in a Pod. This week's episode, we introduce a new segment, as well as we have a new defendant for our exercise court segment. All right, guys, welcome back. Another episode 7, coming at you live. 3 PT guys sitting around talking about PT things. 3 PTs in a pod. This week's episode is jam-packed with great content for you guys. We're going to start with a new segment, unless anyone has any opening remarks or things they have to get off their chest.
I'm ready to get into it.
All right, so our new segment, it is called the Summer Reading Pearl Jam. So we're going to
Any better?
Each one of us is going to kind of take a excerpt from one of the books we're reading over the summer and share it with you guys, and then we'll kind of do a little jam session together, a little riffing on what that excerpt means, how it relates to physical therapy or PT school. So that's where Pearl Jam comes into it. We're giving you a pearl of information from our reading, and then we're doing a little jam session on what it means and how it relates to PT. So the inaugural jam session, Summer Reading Pearl Jam, comes from our good friend, Jordan Peterson's book.
He's listening right now.
12 Rules for Life, An Antidote to Chaos.
That's not even a plug. He
sent us a signed copy.
Yeah, signed copy. He'll be on the podcast at some point. So I'm actually going to share with you guys, and I'm actually going to read the excerpt. It's a couple paragraphs, so bear with me. But it is from the foreword of the book. And it is by Dr. Norman Deutsch, maybe. MD. Hopefully, Norman, I'm not...
Yeah, he wrote a book on the brain.
Yes, the brain that changes itself.
Yeah.
So this comes from him. It's basically the foreword to the book, so it's kind of introing you into the book. But this specific excerpt is talking specifically about Dr. Peterson and him and what he does with some of his students. He's a professor at the University of Toronto up in Canada. He's a psychology professor. So it's sort of a look into his approach and sort of some of the themes and things that he talks with his students about, and I think it applies really well to just life in general, but also PT and PT school. So without further ado, give my best Jocko Willink impression here. So here we go. Above all, he alerted his students to topics rarely discussed in university, such as the simple fact that all of the ancients, from Buddha to the biblical authors, knew what every slightly worn-out adult knows, that life is suffering. If you are suffering or someone close to you is, that's sad. But alas, it's not particularly special. We don't suffer only because politicians are dim-witted or the system is corrupt, or because you and I, like almost everyone else, can legitimately describe ourselves in some way as a victim of something or someone. It is because we are born human that we are guaranteed a good dose of suffering. And chances are, if you or someone you love is not suffering now, they will be within 5 years, unless you are freakishly lucky. Rearing kids is hard. Work is hard. Aging, sickness, and death are hard. And Jordan emphasized that doing all that totally on your own without the benefit of a loving relationship or wisdom or the psychological insights of the greatest psychologists only make it harder. He wasn't scaring the students. In fact, they found this frank talk reassuring, because in the depths of their psyches, most of them knew what he said was true, even if there was never a forum to discuss it, perhaps because the adults in their lives have become so naively overprotective that they deluded themselves into thinking that not talking about suffering would in some way magically protect their children from it. Here he would relate the myth of the hero, a cross-cultural theme explored psychoanalytically by Otto Rank, who noted, following Freud, that hero myths are similar in many cultures, a theme that was picked up by Carl Jung, Joseph Campbell, and Eric Newman, among others. Where Freud made great contributions in explaining neuroses by, among other things, focusing on understanding what we might call a failed hero story, that of Oedipus, Jordan focused on triumphant heroes. In all these triumph stories, the hero has to go into the unknown, into an unexplored territory, and deal with a new great challenge and take great risks. In this process, something of himself has to die or be given up so he can be reborn and meet the challenge. This requires courage, something rarely discussed in a psychology class or textbook. Boom. So, a lot of things from that. I made a list of some of my thoughts on it, see what you guys think as well. But number one, I wanted to just pull up the definition of suffering, because I think some people hear the word suffer and they think they can immediately just look over it because it doesn't apply to them, or they think it's too much of a word, it's too heavy of a word. And a simple Google search of the word suffer simply means or says is to experience or be subjected to something bad or unpleasant. And I think that's a pretty good definition to go off of, especially when we're trying to relate the idea of suffering or hardship to something like PT school or like the experiences we're going through, because they aren't, suffering to the level you generally think about in your head when you think of the word. We're not going through, some life-altering disease, or we're not going through, we're not living in a country where we have to fear for our lives every day. But we are going through difficult things and things that we aren't probably used to from undergrad education. It's definitely a more challenging curriculum. It's definitely a more challenging couple of years of our lives in terms of the stress that we get from school. So I think the number one point I made is that it should be expected. So suffering and hardship and challenge should be expected, and you should know that you're going to have it to some degree and to some level at various times throughout your time in PT school. I think some people, I thought it was a great line when he talked about parents being so naive and deluded or delusional that they don't even mention suffering to their kids.
Protect their kids from,
Yep.
Especially this generation, too. It's like the helicopter parents generation.
millennials.
Everyone gets a trophy, first place for everyone, no losers.
Yeah.
It's just,
Yeah.
it's too much.
Yeah, as far as us suffering, for sure, and it might be a good thing for the most part, but you also have to think, if you have that experience with suffering and you know what it's like, or dealing with stress and things like that, think about your patients. Your patients are suffering.
Yep.
Potentially. They're in pain, they can't go to work, or they go to work and they're in pain all day, whatever. You have to know what that's like, not necessarily from a pain perspective, but to know all the high levels of stress, high levels of suffering, to be able to relate to them and empathize with them.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's just an important experience to have.
Right. So it's an opportunity.
Yep.
It's how do you pick, how do you frame it? You can either be a victim, or you can, look at it in the way of what am I getting out of this experience and what am I learning from the difficult times that I'm going through. Find a way to be grateful for that challenge. You know?
There's a book called The Obstacle is the Way. I don't know if you've ever, by Ryan Holiday, but that's pretty much what it's about. You use resistance as a tool to grow, and that's pretty much what it is. You need that resistance, because even if you think of an analogy of in the weight room, you need increased resistance to get bigger, to get stronger, and that's an analogy for life. You need increased resistance to get better, to grow as a person.
Yep.
Bench press is literally life.
Yeah, pretty much.
And when it comes full circle, bench press is a metaphor for life.
There you go.
Dude, that's a really good point. I think the patient perspective and at least having some level of understanding of what it means to go through challenging times, because that's what your patients are dealing with every single day that they come into you, whether it's big or small injury issue that they're having. They're coming to you with some level of suffering or challenge that they're facing. If you've never gone through something like that yourself, or you don't appreciate the times that you did, how can you have empathy for their situation?
Mm-hmm.
So
that kind of goes back to the Therapeutic Alliance article we talked about, and how of a strong factor like empathizing with the patient was compared to like actual. It was STEM, right? That was the treatment,
Yeah.
and then just like sitting them down. I can't imagine what you're going through. Like we're gonna get through this together. Like I don't know exactly what you're going through, but I know like of troubles. Like you can't. Like someone comes in with an amputation, you don't have an amputation. You can't say, "I know what you're going through." You don't know what they're going through, but you can level with them on a certain degree, and then that's when they start to buy in, and then shit starts rolling from there.
Yeah. So just I think to wrap up, like the first point I made about expectations. So you're always better able to handle something if you at least have the idea in your head that it could come about at some point. So I think that just going into school with the understanding that you will have, difficult times and it'll be stressful and challenging at times is going to make you only better able to handle it when it does come. If you're completely blindsided and again have that delusion that you're never going to have an issue, you got through undergrad with straight A's without really having to put in that much work, it's going to hit you 10 times harder than the person who knows it's coming and can better handle it because it's normal, like it should happen. And you're the other person it happens to and they're like, why is this happening to me?
You need to be ready to accept the challenge.
Exactly.
And know that you're going to come out on the other side like a better person.
For sure. And I've learned something.
Yep.
Yeah. And then the last point I had was just going off of your gym like analogy. I think that's one of the most downplayed sides or benefits of like going to the gym and having some sort of physical like exertion that you're putting your body through. Because it does give you like a very small graded level of suffering that you can like manipulate on your own. Like you can decide how much you give and how much like you're willing to take, and getting through those like hard sets. I mean, as funny as it sounds, like grinding out like a 5 mile run when at 3 you were like, fuck this, like I'm going home, but you stuck it out, or going through that set of like your last 15 squats or something, where at 10 you're like, Jesus fucking Christ, like can I even get these last 5? Every single time you're doing that, you're getting like a little bit better able to handle tough times that come at you like just in life. So that psychological side, aside from just the physiological benefits, I think is why it's so important to work out on your own, especially if you're going to become a physical therapist, for Christ's sake. I mean,
not just work out, but like work out hard. Like get to that point of where you want to quit. And then you persevere and you say, fuck that, like I'm going to keep going. That's super important. That's like it just, again, like you said, like the mental and physical side of suffering and breaking through like resistance barriers.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, I just think it's super interesting how much the psyche actually plays into PT in general. I mean, we've kind of been just talking about it, but you think of PT, you think of muscle science, muscles like that. But I mean, I don't know about you guys. I had to take a psych course just to apply to PT school, and then I was like, I don't know, really understand why. And now as I like listen to Jordan Peterson talk and more stuff like that, it's super interesting that even thinking about like what you guys were saying, even like repping to failure. People hate the word failure too. It's also like suffering. But and you mentioned this last week. Like become comfortable like with being uncomfortable basically. Like you're not great yet, but that's great because it'll make you better one day.
You're gonna keep striving to get better. Like as soon as you get comfortable and you get complacent that your career is over. I mean, you're just not gonna get better. Everyone's gonna pass you.
Right.
So that was really good.
That was an awesome quote.
Yeah, that was a really good segment. It's funny because the first half of that was basically like word for word my quote.
So,
didn't even get into the meat of the book yet.
No, not even. So,
shout out to Norman Deutsch.
Yeah, shout out. So maybe yours we'll do for our next.
Yeah, I mean, if we want to have the same exact conversation we had today.
Well, we'll get like another month or two, give it time, and then people will know and watch this episode. So
we'll be more mature by then.
By that time, we'll have maybe 50 listeners instead of 10.
Maybe I'll read something by then.
We won't hold our breath.
All right, so that's our first summer reading Pearl Jam. Next up, we've got another installment of Exercise Court. So our first defendant or exercise that we looked at was, what was it? Clamshells. So today's defendant up to the podium is TA draw-ins. So very hot button, I think, exercise in all physical therapy circles. So Artem, I think you're gonna lead us off on this, right?
Yeah, so this is actually inspired by one of our listeners, our actually number one fan.
Ken?
No, Kyle Lamarande.
I don't know if we're saying this right.
Kylie, maybe? Maybe
I'm not
Kylie,
sure.
yeah.
So his comment on our last episode said, hey fellas, it's Kyle again. Hey Kyle. Just weighing in on the convo here. My biggest pet peeve is when people disregard simple exercise that have proven validity. Let me give you an example. TA strengthening has a lot of validity in reducing back pain in certain population. Imagine the asshole who would just say, forget that stuff in a stupid Ukrainian accent. I'm not sure who he's referring to there.
Yeah,
I don't know anyone who's Ukrainian.
You know,
Neither do
I can hear some anger in your voice, Kyle.
Yeah.
I mean, it
Yeah.
sounds like you really love this exercise, and you claim that it has validity, but does it?
I. Yeah.
I don't know. So, what do you guys think of it? Let me just start out with that. So here's like to kind of start off. We learn in class that, you know, the TA, the transversus abdominis, is weak in people with back pain, and we should always, you know, go after strengthening it, and that'll somehow help people with back pain. So that's generally the statement. What do you guys think of that?
I'm going to say I'm very leery of that statement.
That's a good word.
I have a hard time believing that one specific muscle in a very complex grouping of muscles being
Did you
the
read
core.
my notes?
No.
Complex system.
Complex system. And not only an individual complex system at the core, but the amount of other complex systems that it has to provide support for during movement, being whether it's upper extremity, lower extremity. I have a hard time believing that just, I guess, individually strengthening the transverse abdominis provides those benefits and really has the one answer to lower back pain. So,
And it's, I guess I'll just play devil's advocate because I know what you're going to say. So I'll try to think of something. Well, who's the original guy that...
Paul Hodges.
Okay, Paul Hodges, yeah. Is he Australian?
Yeah, he's
Gotta
from.
be.
Yeah, he's from.
He was born in, no, he's born in New Zealand.
Yeah,
Flew
I'm
over.
pretty sure he is Australian.
Him and Maitland and
yeah,
they all
those
went to
guys.
grade school
The
together.
good old
Just
boys
talked
club.
about. Well, it's just this idea of like creating this
The canister.
the system,
canister.
yeah,
Right.
the can
Closed, yeah.
with all the breathing, and I mean,
The
you guys know more than me
intra-abdominal
that
pressure.
through PRI and stuff. Diaphragm is obviously the most worked muscle in the body, and it's just like the interplay. So if you, I guess I won't say like it's an end-all be-all exercise, TA draw-ins, but at the same time, it's like why not see if it can play a role in stabilization of instability in low back, and if not, then you don't keep going. The only problem I have with it is how hard it is to teach.
Well, that's a point I was
teach
just
the
about
patients.
to make. Yeah.
Even we do it all the time in class with the biofeedback cuff and everything, and it's extremely difficult. Imagine trying to teach that with someone who's afraid to move, basically, and trying to overcome that fear first, and then by telling them, look, this small little muscle in your core here is going to help stabilize your spine.
And now let's add on top of that complex movements of like daily activity, you know, while keeping that same.
Right.
But I would say, like, off of your point, KP, that I don't think the transverse abdominis doesn't mean anything.
Right.
Like, I think it's an important player on a team that provides the stabilization needed to perform movement pain-free. And I think it's just not ideal to like downplay the other players on the team. It's not that much of a star that the other ones don't mean anything and that you shouldn't pay attention to them. And because of how difficult it is to teach someone, I think all those things play into my like coming to the conclusion of it's probably not like gonna be my go-to start off pitch.
Especially with the teammates, we'll call them, are really important muscles like the diaphragm, like the intercostals, like the other abdominals. So to pick out like the right fielder and a starting 9 from baseball, I don't know. Maybe we should go for the shortstop.
Right.
Little baseball talk for you.
I don't know what you guys are doing. But anyways, and I totally agree. We're not, discrediting the TA as an important muscle. We're talking about the TA drawn as a specific exercise.
Mm-hmm.
And why it might be, not the most effective. Like you said, like it's a single muscle in a complex system. Complex system has redundancy, so there's always going to be something to take up the slack of something that's not performing. That's just how they work. And like the initial research that Hodges did found that people with back pain compared to healthy individuals had a timing difference. So like when they would move their arm, like healthy individuals, prior to them actually initiating the movement, the TA would fire to stabilize the core, to provide a stable foundation for the arm to move on.
Mm-hmm.
So they found that I believe in people with lower back pain, they had a 1/50th of a second delay in firing of the TA before arm movements. So that was in the 90s. So now what we know, like actually Hodges has done this research on motor control, that pain causes a reorganization of the nervous system and alters motor control.
Mm.
So it's not that the delay in firing is what caused the back pain. It's the pain from the back that caused the reorganization of the nervous system. So it's kind of like it was before, it was like the chicken or the egg, but now we pretty much know it's the pain that's causing this, not the TA causing the pain. So that's an important thing to know, because maybe I don't know this for sure, but doing anything to decrease pain and eliminate pain in the back would theoretically normalize or reorganize the central nervous system back and normalize like the firing rate. And then as far as like research goes into like after the interventions, timing doesn't necessarily go back to normal. Like it doesn't change timing. So we don't really know what's going on. They have studies comparing general exercise to like core stability exercises, and they found that those are kind of equal in results. So it could be that you're doing your abdominal drawn maneuver, and you're just the act of exercising is what's helping the person, not necessarily that they're pulling their belly button in and training this muscle. And you were kind of talking about like the intra-abdominal pressure. So there's been research done by Stu McGill, and I think he found that during the TA drawn maneuver, activity of the internal oblique, which is just as important as the TA in creating and maintaining pressure, is decreased. So you're actually you're increasing one, decreasing another. So that's not good either.
Robbing Peter to pay Paul, some may say.
Yeah, some may say,
Stu, who's our
good
next
American,
guest?
good American term there. So along with creating that canister, so you're shutting down the internal oblique, you're pulling in your belly button, so now you're decreasing space in the abdominal cavity for diaphragm excursion. So you're fucking with breathing, which is the most vital task you could do in a human. You don't breathe, you don't live. So you're limiting diaphragm excursion. So now you're getting decreased intra-abdominal pressure. So with decrease, which in my opinion, I think intra-abdominal pressure is what truly stabilizes the core. If you think about it like a power lifter, they have 500 pounds or 600 pounds on their back. They're taking a giant breath of air in and they're closing off their glottis. They're doing the Valsalva maneuver. So that's what's truly stabilizing them. That's why they do it. If you're looking for
one lift.
Yeah, if you're looking for maximum stability, you're going to use a Valsalva maneuver, which promotes maximum intra-abdominal pressure.
Right.
So that's where you're getting your true stability. So if you're not getting that, like, I understand where they're coming from, where like that's like the outside of the canister, but so is the internal oblique.
Right.
But you're robbing too much of the other things.
Right.
But by doing that maneuver, and just the research, comparing general exercise to core stability, if they're finding the same things, I feel like there's more benefit to general exercise just because you're improving other fitness qualities and not just strengthening one muscle. And then like we talk about like the psychological factors involved. Telling someone that like their core is weak kind of has that like fear-inducing effect where like they're like I can't lift that because the PT said my core is weak.
And that's why I have back pain.
Yeah, and I have back pain because my core is well, like that. We don't know that. We don't know why your back hurts, but telling you that is going to induce fear, and now you're avoiding other activities, and now you're deconditioned and you're weak, and life just gets harder for you.
Right.
So that's it's there's no absolute. Sometimes you can if like person can't do anything else, but they could do a fucking TA draw, do it. But you can't just say like the TA draw is going to fix your back pain. The TA is responsible for it's going to cure everything. So that's just my opinion on it.
I would agree. I think KP you do too. It's just you were trying to give at least somewhat of a.
If you don't agree, you could just.
There's the door.
I think the cool thing from what you kind of just said was that the abdominal draw-in maneuver basically decreases the pressure.
Right.
Because it disallows the diaphragm to.
Yeah, like if you think about you can't normally breathe.
Excursion, I think you used.
Yeah, like you can't normally breathe while you're drawing in your belly button as hard as you can.
Right.
And then,
so we should do abdominal push-out maneuvers. Just sit there with the belly button.
Yeah, I don't
abdominal
know.
bracing, I think, is the key.
So
what would we do instead? I mean, if TA draw-ins are out, that's kind of, I would say across the board in physical therapy, that's people's go-to core exercise. If you're weak, you start with the TA draw-in, you progress off of that to more, complex movements on top of the draw-in, so drawing in with movement.
Yeah. So actually, our professor just did a study on the TA muscle activity during different exercises.
Yeah, that's pretty cool.
And they found that sitting on like a stability ball or like a physio ball and doing PNF patterns had the highest activity of the TA. Mind you, they didn't do a TA draw-in. So they compared that against a TA draw-in and found that without doing a TA draw-in and doing PNF pattern, so arm movements causes reflexive firing of the TA, which is how it functions. It's a reflexive muscle. So just like think about like the functionality of teaching someone how to pull in their belly button and do it all day and do it while it's not it's not how the body functions.
Right.
It functions as a reflexive muscle. Before you move your arm, it fires. So that's doing stuff like that, like you were just saying, incorporating different movements.
Stuff.
But then if you go back to I think our second episode where we talked about like our treatment philosophy, that's our treatment philosophy for treating any. I mean, you restore normal motion,
right?
So normal range of motion in the hip, thoracic spine, wherever, and then graded exposure to like the painful movement. So if they're not super irritated by flexion but it hurts, like do some fucking cat camels or whatever. Just like graded exposure to that motion and then load it. Get their body used to loading, get them stronger and get them. Get their fitness up.
I mean, while you're the expert, you're determining the proper dosage and the proper loading on top of that.
So dose and load management, pretty much, and then like once you restore normal motion.
So you would shy away from any direct core work, or would you?
No, I mean you could incorporate it in like your normal training program.
So I guess I'm just saying with these patients, like what are you doing instead of the TA drawing? Is there any particular go-to exercise?
It depends on the patient.
Yeah.
You can't say for sure like, oh, do this, do that. Like it depends on what they're.
Depends.
Yeah, it depends. Yeah. Sorry, but I mean, yeah, you could certainly. I like to incorporate like core movements that have more movement, like more dynamic, like bear crawls and stuff. Things like that. You have like the arm movement. You have like maintaining a stable core, stable thorax.
Right. I guess that's what I'm getting to. Like I think it is. I mean, for instance, like dead bugs or something.
Dead bugs, cable chops, things like that. Like I like all those, and those kind of have like the arm movement, the leg movement, where the TA and the other core muscles have to reflexively stabilize. I think that's a better option. But just in general, just exercise, get whatever fitness qualities are lacking, power, capacity. Strength, work on those.
I think once again the underlying theme there is we're doing that because it not only incorporates or recruits the TA transverse abdominis, but it also recruits and uses the intercostals, the internal obliques,
Yeah.
the, you know, multifidi.
Yeah, you could coordinate your breathing with some of
breathing,
these
diaphragm.
exercises, get the diaphragm working, and then, you know, we know that like forceful exhalation actually incorporates the abdominals more.
Mm-hmm.
So things like that, like you integrate everything.
Yeah.
Don't just isolate, you know,
Yeah.
one thing. We're just gonna do this, and like that's all we're gonna do. Integrate all the different factors. That's how, you know, your body functions. So
Sure.
train it that way.
Yeah.
So I think part of that is like going from here. So a lot of, especially in school, a lot of people do kind of, you know, school is sort of there to provide you an initial framework to at least have some sort of structure to what you're doing. So for most people, I have a low back pain patient. They can't, you know, they present with this in the eval. They have poor motor control of their core. I'm going to give them a TA draw-in.
Yeah.
Well, now we understand that maybe that's not the greatest go-to, or that we shouldn't be doing just those. So now it's on you. Now go out on your own, find resources, dive in further into like different people who are putting information out online or books or articles, and find out really what the like top people in the industry are doing and how they're treating patients, and sort of work it out on your own and see what you're comfortable with, see what comes natural to you in terms of teaching people. I think just for me, just from a personal training background, like core, I did like a dead bug type exercise to start with.
FMS has a lot of good some of that
that's
stuff
true.
like
FMS
as far as like direct core training
provides a nice structure for some of that. Again, just because of the fact that someone who may be a pretty poor mover and have pretty poor motor control, giving them that, you know, tactile feedback of their back against like a table or a firm surface, it just sort of helps initially get them that proprioceptive feedback that they need to be able to feel what they're doing and kind of get an understanding of what you're trying to have them do. I do think biofeedback and like anything you can use to provide feedback is nice. It is just that the TA draw-in is so hard to teach people. You know, it's like, number one, just teaching them to do it the first time, but now we're going to do like a leg movement with a TA draw. I mean, it just, I personally haven't seen it be used that effectively with patients, and that they get it really well and feel really good about it. So
it just doesn't make any sense, like especially when you would tell a person to fucking do it all day while they're walking around. It's just like, it doesn't make any sense. We've, you know, how many millions of years of evolution, like nobody did that up until now. You know, there's a reason for that.
Right.
It's because it's not how the body functions.
Yeah. But it goes back to like what Chris was saying about school teaching it this way and then going out and doing it on your own. It's this is the theory, make it practical later on. Like this is what you need. You're not going to learn this theory out there. You'll learn the theory here. Now go learn how to engage, because that's what it's really about. It's the TA draw is creating the pressure, quote, and then engaging things like the multifidi, which are hard to engage like separately. Like here, engage this segment of your multifidi now. But going back to an exercise, I kind of just thought of one was quadruped and like opposite arm, opposite leg.
Bird dog.
Is that what? Bird dogs.
Those are great too.
Because that's like,
and
that in my mind directly engages the multifidi, because you're stabilizing and you're also doing the movement, which is the reflexive, what you were talking about. So
that's a really good point, KP. I mean, you are getting, like, we do have a understanding of the basic like conceptual idea of what we're getting at with this from school. Like we need intra-abdominal pressure, we need proper motor control. Those things are important. It's not like that's just bullshit. But are we doing the best? You know, are we giving the best exercises and going about it the best possible way with the information that we now have? I mean, maybe at one time that seemed like the best way to do it, but don't be stuck in the 90s with what you're doing with your patients, you know?
And that's the other idea of research being behind 15 years. It's probably going to be changing when the next 3 PTs in a pod, our kids, our kids make a PT podcast.
Don't get complacent. I mean, always be looking for the best information and never believe that you have all the answers. You know, always be willing to at least listen to what's out there and test it against what you believe.
Because then you're not really an expert at all. You're just doing what you've been told to do, and then there's no critical thinking. We always talk about critical thinking, 3 sets of 10. It's all bullshit. if you're not able to like think about what's going on, use the
Know-
theory to make it practical, like then you're just basically like a tech.
Know
Honestly,
the
that
why.
you're just doing like an exercise with them.
Yeah, know the why behind what you're
exactly.
That's what makes experts.
Yeah.
You're able to, in the moment,
Yeah.
formulate a plan off of your own understanding and not just
Mm-hmm.
reproduce something that you've learned before. So. All right,
Awesome.
boys. Did we
That's a
figure
good
it out?
one.
All right.
Yeah.
Case
Solved it.
closed on
Case
those
fucking
bad boys.
closed.
Fucking lock
T.A.
it
Johns.
up.
All right.
15 to life.
15 to life,
Yeah,
yeah.
at
Sentencing,
least.
yeah. Yeah, leave it in the past.
Maximum security prison.
Don't let it out. All right.
Alcatraz.
Episode 7, thanks for tuning in. If you guys disagree about T.A. Johns, send
You're
us
fucking idiots.
an email. First of all, go fuck yourself. Second of all, send us an email at 3ptsinapod@gmail.com. Give us your side of the story, or just ask us a question. Give us something you want to hear us talk about. Otherwise, we'll be back next week for episode 8. See ya.
Fuck you, Kylie.